Jesus a witch? Were there sorcery? Was he a magician? Or was he the true son of God? So, a little bit of a taboo topic today, but we like to cover those over here. So, hi, welcome back. I'm Jenna, your host. This is going to be covering a lot of different things. Some people, it's probably going to ruffle your feathers. I feel like this needs to be a discussion that's had so that people can gain some knowledge, and that's the whole purpose of the podcast. So, was Jesus a witch? Was he a sorcerer? Was he involved in the dark arts, magic? Was he a healer? We have articles that show that he performed acts and miracles in the Bible, right? That says that he healed a blind man, he made the lame man walk, things like that. He walked on water, he turned water into wine, all of these things, right? That seem completely out there in the grand scheme of things. And we don't hear about too many other people that actually perform these miracles or these acts anywhere else. So it does kind of give you some reason to wonder. So what is witchcraft? Let's talk about it. So witchcraft is defined as the practice of magic, especially for evil purposes. You're going to see that they give a lot of what's the right word for it? They give a lot of power to the evil, never really to the light side. And I feel like there is a reason for that. But we'll get into that. So, witchcraft, it's defined as the practice of magic, especially for evil purposes, and the use of spells. In modern context, religious practices involving magic and affinity with nature, usually with a pagan tradition. So, if you go way, way back in history, and for those of you that don't really know your history, I feel like this is maybe going to be a little bit of an eye opener. So, part of this starts way, way back, and I want to say it's like the third or the fourth century. And there were lots of people who were considered healers, especially women. We have shamans, we have healers, we have mystics, we have all of these different words basically meaning the same thing. Sometimes they used rituals, sometimes they used ceremonies, sometimes they would have used herbs or apothecary type things in order to put these remedies or these things together to heal somebody. Now, did it always work? No, but it was something that was been in practice for a very, very long time, many, many centuries. Fast forward. Okay, so we have Jesus in the Bible talking about all these different things and healing people and doing acts and miracles and all these things in front of people, right? There's documentation to support some of this. So this gives some sort of like pause to wonder, was it really what he claimed it to be? Or, and I'm going to play devil's advocate today, or was it something else? Was he truly a magician of sorts? Right. So we all know the general depiction of what a witch looks like, right? Old haggard woman, tall pointed hat, and riding her broomstick. Sometimes she's got little familiars with her like black cats, things like that. Now, witches were originally demonized back in the Renaissance era, probably a little before that, but we've all heard of like the Salem witch trials and things like that. Witches were the medicine women, usually tribes people or shamans, spiritual healers, doctors of sorts back in their time. And these women typically were not using these powers or this knowledge to hurt people. They were typically using them to help people heal. So think of maybe they were making tinctures or potions, medicines, from herbs or different plant medicine that they needed to help the people in their village, in their town, in their home. And so these women, when Christianity started to take over the pagan areas of the world, paganism has been around for centuries, that was something that they practiced using herbs and nature and honoring Mother Nature and the planet and the trees and the birds and the bees and nature. So Christianity came and started to take things over, and as a result, the old ways of doing things started to be pushed out, and they were demonized because how do you get everybody to fall in line unless you tell them that it's evil? So let's see, what does a real witch look like? So before I show you the pictures that I have, what is the full meaning of witchcraft? It says witchcraft is the use of magic by a person called a witch. Traditionally, witchcraft means the use of magic to inflict supernatural harm or misfortune on others, and this remains the most common and widespread meaning. So they created their own meaning for what a witch is, right? So that they could persecute, so that they could have control over masses of people who would have probably gone to these people without a second's thoughts, like, oh, that's the healer. That's who we go to when things are not so good, when we're sick, when we've got something going on, right? You look at Native American culture, and they had shamans or medicine men, medicine women, the witch doctors, things like that, right? Where did all of these things come from? Well, in society, we've always had. So we're all familiar with those types of witch photographs or witch depictions, correct? So if you think of like the Wizard of Oz, we had the evil witch, right? Who fits that description. She was green and she was dressed in black and she had like, the typical hook nose and she had moles on her face, things like that. And she was painted green, right? To make her look scary. Okay. In The Wizard of Oz, we also had Glinda the Good Witch, who was beautiful, who was, a helper, right? Are we starting to see there's two sides of the coin here? So I feel like misogyny was a big part of that. We'll get into that as well. But what would be considered witchcraft, right? We know we've heard of these things. We know we've seen what Hollywood or whatever depicts these things as. But what's really considered to be witchcraft? So, witchcraft is a perceived fallacy to summon evil spirits and demons to do harm to others. It was linked to religion to the extent that the medieval church had powers to punish those who dabbled in magic and sorcery, right? And so, if we know anything about our history, we know that there's a lot of dark parts of our history, especially in the United States and elsewhere around the world. And so, the control started back in medieval times. Think King James version of the Bible, right? He had it rewritten into the modern tongue. So the these and the thous and all those things, right? Because that was how we spoke at the time. And he left out certain texts of the original Bible, like the book of Enoch, which talks about the great floods. It talks about the Nephilim. And for those of you who don't know, the Nephilim are fallen angels who mated with humans and had offspring known as the Nephilim or the giants. And so some of these things were left out. Well, if we're leaving out certain things like that, it would give reason that maybe we also tweaked things to benefit what we wanted to control, right? A lot of people couldn't read and write in those times. Only nobility or scholars actually had the means to learn to read and write. So the peasants, the little people, they didn't know how to read or write, most of them. And so it would have been very difficult for them to read, write, and understand the Bible, right? And so there were lots of changes that started to be implemented. One of those was that we were casting out the pagans and we were trying to reform all these people into what? Christians, right? And so many, many wars have been fought over religion, spiritual practices, and all of these different belief systems. So I feel like there's a lot of things that were twisted to form this narrative that witches were evil instead of actual healers. So, have you ever considered yourself a witch? I do, and I'll tell you exactly why I personally consider myself a witch. Number one, I know that I'm a healer, and I've always been a healer. My spiritual gifts allow me to offer healing to other people. Sometimes that comes at the expense of my own self care and things like that. And over the years, I've had to implement boundaries so that I'm not physically drained by people. However, some people have a negative connotation with the word witch. I don't. To me, a witch is a healer. It's somebody that uses their energy, their magic, their knowledge, their spiritual beliefs, their religious beliefs, nature, herbs, all of these things at your disposal in order to help others heal. Okay, and so that is the connotation that I want people to become more familiar with, that a witch is actually a healer, male or female. So we have warlocks, we have witches, and that would be the masculine version of a witch. So what actually makes somebody a witch? In contemporary pagan and Wiccan traditions, someone becomes a witch by identifying with the path and practicing witchcraft, which can include various spiritual or magical rituals, spells, or a deep connection with nature and the divine. In historical context, witch often referred to individuals accused of harmful magic or associating with dark forces, leading to persecution and witch hunts. Modern witchcraft is diverse, encompassing a wide range of practices and beliefs, with many witches embracing a spiritual path that emphasizes personal growth, healing, and connection to nature. And those are more of what I practice. When I do things, I'm usually trying to manifest positive changes in my life. I'm also somebody that practices protection magic. So if harm's trying to come against me or my family, things like that, I throw up things called wards for protection to protect us from any sort of negative energy. I will tell you that there is plenty of evil to go around in the world, and we see it everywhere. So that's not something that most people would deny, that evil is real. Now, the positive is also true. There's lots of people that are healers in the world. There's lots of people that are really out there trying to do good and better the world and be the change that we want to see in the world. I'm one of those people. So, in order to kind of create balance in the scales, right? We know as above, so below, light and dark, that's what creates the balance. We have to learn to integrate our own darkness in order to go towards the light. Not everybody has that path. Sometimes we have evil in the world and we have to do our best to try and counteract those things. And so that's part of my purpose as being a light worker or a witch here, is to try and spread that healing and that knowledge and trying to counteract the evil or demonic forces that exist in this world. So let's discuss a little bit about some modern witchcraft. So there's a lot of spiritual practice involved. Many modern witches identify with pagan or Wiccan belief systems. I identify more as pagan than I do as Wiccan. I don't see anything wrong with either one, as long as you're not trying to harm people. All right, so viewing nature or sacred and incorporated rituals, spells, and connection with deities into their practice. Now, I will tell you, I have been visited by a few deities in my years that I've been doing this. One is Archangel Michael. I've seen him, probably I would say a handful of times. He's come to me at different times in my life, different periods of my journey, different growth, and he has always made me feel assured that I am safe and protected when I'm working and walking my path. The other one that was a little bit newer to me was Lilith, and we've done a whole podcast about the divine feminine, and Lilith is mentioned in there in pretty great detail. Lilith has come to me in a dream. I've seen her in visions a few times as well, and she also comes through offering protection from negative or negative energy, evil, things like that. So sometimes your path is so great that you are not only protected by the light side, you're also protected energetically on the dark side. So I have both. They've both come forward and said they offer energetic protection for me when I work. So when I work, as in I'm channeling, I'm actively doing some sort of like spell or incantation, ritual, ceremony to help offer protection. So it's interesting how there's so much information out there, yet so many people are misinformed about the true experience. So there's also intentionality that comes with working in these realms. A core aspect of modern witchcraft is intentionality, where practitioners focus their thoughts and actions towards specific outcomes or spiritual goals, right? What is your intention? We always talk about setting your intention before you do any sort of spellcasting, ritual, ceremony, because your intention is really what drives it, okay? It's the energy behind it, good or bad, right? Because it could be both. So in the good side of things, which is where we're going to focus our energy today, we try and do things to either protect, clear energy, heal, things like that. We're sending positive energy. You hear spiritual people talk about sending you good vibes. It's the intention is the vibration, right? And so it can be good or it can be bad. It can be positive, it can be negative, it can be up, it can be down, right? And so the intention is truly what matters when you do these things. For me, it's the exact same thing as when we pray for somebody. It's the intention, right? You're sending out that love frequency, that love vibration, that healing. That's the intention behind the prayer. It's the same energy. You just use different words to describe it. So I feel like a lot of these terms are interchangeable. I feel like a lot of them were kind of stolen from the pagan religion and tweaked a little bit to form them into what we know as Christianity beliefs today. There is personal growth with witchcraft. It's often seen as a path of self discovery, personal empowerment, and spiritual growth, encouraging individuals to connect with their inner selves and to develop their intuition. Now, I will tell you, in the beginning of my journey, I did not consider myself a witch. I always thought that I had kind of some witchy tendencies to things, but I really considered myself more of a Christian my whole life. And mostly due to like how I grew up. I grew up in a pretty normal household. I had a great grandfather that was a minister in the Methodist church. And so I grew up going to church. That was something that I wasn't unfamiliar with. Went to Sunday school, learned about the Bible, learned about Jesus, God, all the angels, all these things, right? And then as I grew older, I kind of fell away from a lot of that stuff. It just didn't really resonate with my soul any longer. Not that I stopped believing in God, not that I stopped believing that Jesus existed. Those are two things that stayed constant in my life. What changed was within me, and I realized that a lot of this was for control of the masses, that it really wasn't something that resonated with my soul anymore, and that I needed to be true to myself, and that I felt like I connected more to God through nature, through music, through things that had nothing to do with a dusty, crusty old Bible. And I still have several of them around, but I don't find myself wanting to engage reading it. I want to engage with God in other ways. And so when I channel, I have experienced the Holy Spirit several times, and it's a very different energy. And I was actually discussing this with my boyfriend last night about how when the Holy Spirit comes over me when I channel for anyone, I'm usually overcome with emotions. The tears don't stop flowing, not because I'm sad, not because I'm upset. It's just the energy, and that's how it presents to me. That's how I always know I'm in the presence of the Holy Spirit. It comes through as the most beautiful, blissful, peaceful energy. And so when I channel spirit from the other side, um, God sometimes will come through and that energy overtakes me. God's presence, when I'm in the presence of God, when I'm channeling spirit, is the most peaceful, serene, blissful energy. And God is not male or female. It is simply energy. It's light when it comes through. It's very high vibrational. It's very peaceful. It's this existence of just pure bliss and safety. And so I feel like people don't realize that when we leave our vessel, our human body, and we return to source energy, God, source, spirit, the universe, whatever you call that higher power, that we return to that blissful, peaceful state. And so there's literally nothing to fear when we transition from living to death, because we have the opportunity. We can come back and have a do-over in a different vessel, or we can do something useful on the other side. Maybe you become a guide for somebody. Maybe, you're doing other things on the other side, but it's all a learning experience, and that's what we're here to do. So it's also important to mention that there's a lot of diversity in witchcraft practices. Witchcraft can encompass a wide spectrum of practices, from working with herbs and crystals to spell casting, divination, and energy work. So I do a little bit of a mixture of a few of those things. I do divination because I do tarot. I do have crystals. Sometimes I use them in certain things, like I have a money bowl that I make monthly to attract money and wealth coming into my life. I do things like burn bay leaves with intentions on them. I do protection magic. So sometimes people have a timeout and they have to go sit in a jar in my freezer Not literally, they're not bodies in my freezer. But things like that. So divination. I also do energy work. So channeling is part of energy work, and that's something that's a spiritual goal or a spiritual calling and actually help others, and that's part of my spiritual practices here. So, a lot of the spiritual practices that I implement in my practice have to do with not only reclaiming my power, but also to help others heal along the way. That's part of what my spiritual calling is here on my life. So, part of it has to do with feminist identity. Some identify with witchcraft as a feminist label, reclaiming power and autonomy outside of the traditional patriarchal structures, right? So, we had a lot of misogyny, it still exists today, about women not being in power. You can see it literally all over the world. There's lots of places that still deem women as less than. They don't want them to be educated. They don't want them to have a voice. They don't want them to be in leadership as in any way, shape, or form. And I've actually run into that myself just being on social media. A couple weeks back, I had a man in my comments saying that women were never called to be teachers and leaders according to the Bible. He quoted scripture. And so it never really seems to end. I'm a very empowered, educated person, and I try and share knowledge. I don't try and act like a know-it-all. I don't try and come across as somebody who's better than anybody else, but I feel like there's a purpose why some of these people are misinformed, right? It was for control. If you look at it like this, if there's a large group of people and they're all, you know, doing their thing, they go to work, their daily grind, and they pay their bills and they do that. Okay, well, it's pretty calm, pretty humdrum, right? Nothing to see here. Now, if you sprinkle a little bit of knowledge in there and people realize that they're getting screwed over by the man, or, they've been told that they're free, but they're really controlled by the elites or the higher ups in their government, and they really don't have as much freedom or power as they thought, then you stand that there might be an uprising or a revolution, and we've seen it happen in history. So I feel like there's been a lot of instances where things needed to change and they did a little bit, but it wasn't enough change. And so I feel like because we're in the age of Aquarius, that there's lots of things that we're going to start to see really change and stick, because hundreds of years of oppression, no matter who you are in the human race, is enough, and the people are sick of it. They just want to really live their life and be free. And so I feel like we're going to start to see a lot of these revolutions start to happen. Some of them start from within, and some of them happen to have a ripple effect and create change on a global scale. And that's what we're here to see during this 5D elevated change, or the global shift and split. So there are some historical contexts with misogyny and persecution. Historically, the term witch was often associated with misogyny, with women accused of harmful magic and subjected to persecution and witch hunts. We've all heard about the Salem witch trials, right? So there were many instances, and I don't have the documentation right here in front of me, but there were several instances where people were called a witch with zero proof or evidence, but because of the time that it was in, it was taken as fact, right? Somebody accused you, there was no real trial or anything a lot of times, and you were just put to death. Hangings, being burned at the stake, we've seen a lot of those. And it was a pretty horrible time to be a woman in particular, and especially if you were accused of being a witch, because many of them were killed without any real rhyme or reason, no real proof to back it up. It was simply somebody accused you, and that was all it took. We see things like that still to this day, that there's false accusations made of people, and it literally dismantles or ruins their entire life. So some things in society definitely need to change. There's lots of negative connotations that come with the word witch or witchcraft. In some historical context, witchcraft was linked to the devil and evil practices, leading to widespread fear and condemnation, right? People were fearful of the witches in society. They were made to be fearful, I should say. You think of like the story of Hansel and Gretel, right? The witch that lived out in the woods, and these children stumbled onto her home, and all these things. She fed them all these things, and she fattened them up, and she shoved them in the oven, and she cooked them. Is there proof of these things? Probably unlikely, but there's definitely a lot of folklore and a lot of, old stories that we've heard about through time. So it does give a little bit of like wonder, did that really happen? Was that just a story to scare people? Or were they trying to keep people away from these healers? Maybe the witches were trying to keep the people away because they didn't want to be persecuted. So there's lots of accusations of harm. You'll see the definitions talk about using this for evil purposes. Now, I won't be the one to tell you that there's not practicing people that use baneful or harmful magic, because there are. However, I would say that the majority do not use things like that unless there is a good reason. So, historical witch trials often involved accusations of using magic to cause harm, sickness, or misfortune to others, and sometimes involved pacts with the devil. Now, there are actual instances where there's documentation that those things have happened. However, I would say that it's not the norm, that it's more of the folklore that's attached to the harmful magic. So let's talk about the intent, because the intent is the important part. In modern witchcraft, it often emphasizes positive intentions and personal growth, while historical accusations focused on harmful magic. So there's a bit of a difference there. In the social context, modern witchcraft is often practiced within supportive communities, while historical accusations are often used to persecute and control individuals. So a bit of a change there as well. We know of witch covens, right? And there's a picture that I showed earlier about the witch coven, a group of witches together doing rituals, spells, incantations, manifestations, etc., etc. So, they had a support system. The old saying, it takes a village, right? In old times, there would have been a village of women or males that all congregated together to do these things, right? These healing ceremonies. We see it a lot in pagan cultures. We see it a lot in Native American cultures, that they had certain ceremonies or rituals to do certain things, whether it was for good or not. Totally different story. But we do see that in history, there was a lot of these covens or groups together that would work together for the common good. The identity. Many modern witches embrace the term witch as a positive identifier, while historical accusations often carried negative connotations and social stigma. So, for years, again, I didn't call myself a witch, but now I do. I tell people, yeah, I'm witchy, I'm not hiding from that or anything. And it's to each their own. Maybe you're not comfortable being called that, even though maybe you feel like you're kind of pulled that direction. So, to each their own. So is witchcraft spiritual? I personally think that it is. Witches are often depicted as villains in fairy tales, and Maleficent is what's coming to mind. How funny. Or exorcisers of the satanic occult in scary movies, right? They're always made out to be the bad guy. But for practitioners of modern witchcraft, it is spiritual, empowering, and magical. And I personally believe that it's a spiritual journey. So again, shamanism comes to mind. Native American cultures had shamans, medicine men, medicine women. They were the healers, right? Maybe they had, I can't remember what it's called. I want to say it's like a spirit walk or something, where they would sit inside of a teepee together, and a lot of times they would inhale intoxicants. So that could have been marijuana, it could have been peyote, things like that, where your mind is in this altered state and you start to see visions. And so you go on this like spiritual retreat. Ashwagandha, I think, is another one that you can go to certain places where it's legal and you can ingest these things, and you go on like these spiritual journeys. And so we've used these sacred herbs and medicines for centuries. We know what they do to the most extent. We've used them, and we know that what happens as a result of using them. And so I feel like a lot of this is part of people's spiritual journey. Now, that's not the case for everybody. Some of you that watch this are going to go, she's lost her damn mind. She's crazy. I don't want to talk to this lady. She scares me. She's weird. I get it. I thought that way for a long time too, but you have to understand that that's part of the control. That's part of what this was designed to do way back when Christianity kind of spread like a cancer to the rest of the world. and it wiped out a lot of different people's belief systems. And so, different parts of the world I feel like were greatly affected versus others. Let's say you were in like a remote jungle in Colombia. Probably unlikely that, it hit those people as quickly as maybe it did here in the United States of America, where things really overtook in Europe, in England, and then, it spread like wildfire across the globe. So, do you know how you would spot a witch? Have you ever tried? Do you want to know? All right, so how you could spot a witch. So, people during the Tudor times believed that there were several ways to spot a witch. A witch was most commonly an old woman. Okay, well, I'm in my mid 40s, so some people would call me an old woman. I'm cool with that. A witch didn't leave a shadow. Now, I think that one was kind of taken out of context because I feel like that's synonymous more not with witches, but more with vampires, right? And so vampires didn't have a reflection. So I feel like some of this was a little bit twisted up. A witch would talk to herself. Guilty, I talk to myself all the time. Truthfully, we're talking to our higher self, our intuition, our spirit guides, God, source, spirit, the universe, creator, whatever you call that. A witch would have pets that followed them around. Guilty again. I have two dogs. One of them is like a little shadow. He's always with me. He's Velcro. He's stuck to my side. Wherever Mama goes, that's where he goes. And he's definitely one of my familiars. All right. A witch often held unusual ceremonies or took part in strange rituals. Sometimes you see them out there under a full moon dancing naked, right? You probably don't see that, but you've probably heard about that. Now, I personally don't go out there and dance naked under the moonlight. I've got neighbors that would be a little awkward and weird, but it does happen. I feel like it's more tapping into that energy of being in alignment with nature, being in alignment with the planet, with the moon, with the seasons, all of those things. And so I feel like a true witch is somebody who's tapped into that vibrational frequency, not only of healing themselves, but of healing others. So what's really behind witchcraft? Is there a purpose behind all of this? Of course there is. Witchcraft is a broad term for the belief and the practice of magic. It can be found in various cultures across history and means something slightly different to every group. Anthropologists define witches as different than sorcerers because their magic comes from inside and not through tools. So things like your intuition, things like being a channeler, an oracle, a seer, all those things would come from inside, right? The call came from inside the house. But a sorcerer would use things like tools, okay? So I also use tools of divination, crystals and tarot cards, things like that, incorporated into my practice. And they're tools that I use to decipher information. So if you think of, blue collar construction worker, right? They've got their hard hat, maybe they have hammers, maybe they've got saws, things like that. Those are their tools for their craft, okay? So witches or sorcerers would also have tools for their craft. There's also many, many types of witchcraft. It's not all synonymous. It's not all in one little neat package. There's many, many types. So within the rich and varied world of witchcraft, there are specialized paths that focus on harnessing specific elements or energies. So let's explore some of these unique practices, including the crystal cosmic, kitchen witch, the sea witches, each bringing their own magic to the tapestry of witchcraft. So we also keep talking about different religion or spiritual belief systems. So do witches believe in God? I personally do. I feel like there's a lot of them that do, but not in the traditional sense of like big sky daddy, in the sky that's a man in the clouds or anything like that. That's not something that I've ever truly really believed existed. I've always felt like it's more energy than it is human form, if that makes more sense. So do witches believe in God? So whether a witch believes in God is not as simple of a yes or a no question, as it depends on the individual witch and their specific beliefs. Many witches, especially those who practice Wicca, believe in a god and a goddess, so a male and a female, but these deities are often understood as aspects of nature or universal energies rather than singular, all-powerful God of monotheistic religions. Some witches may be agnostic or atheist, viewing magic as a way to focus intentions or connect with nature rather than a belief in literal deities. Now, there's lots of spiritual deities all over the globe. Some are, really, really old and ancient that they've been in practice forever. Some people connect with those, some people don't in their practice, and it really is a personal decision. So we're going to try and elaborate a little bit and explain this a little bit more clear. So a little bit more of a detailed breakdown with Wicca and a deity. Wicca is a religion that often involves the worship of a god and a goddess. These deities are often viewed as complementary forces representing the masculine and the feminine aspects of the divine, okay, male and female. The variation in belief. Not all witches are Wiccan. I'm not Wiccan, so no harm or foul to any of you that might be. Even within Wicca, there's a range of beliefs about the nature of the deities. Some witches may work with specific gods and goddesses from various pantheons, while others might see them as symbolic representations of natural forces. Atheist and agnostic witches. Some witches do not believe in any gods or goddesses, viewing magic as a psychological tool or a way to connect with the natural world. They might focus on intention setting, ritual, or personal empowerment. There's also Christian witches. That's going to ruffle some feathers, and that's fine. Discuss in the comments. Christian witches. It's also possible for witches to be Christian, blending their Christian beliefs with witchcraft practices. In this case, they might view the Christian God as the divine power that they work with, or they might incorporate Christian symbolism into their rituals. I fall under that a little bit. So while I still believe in like a Christian God, I connect more with just nature and creation. So it's like a mixture of Christian and pagan beliefs for me personally. I incorporate a lot of nature into my practice. I'm also what's known as a kitchen witch. I use herbs and things like that to create potions or concoctions known as food that we ingest. So the intention definitely matters. So we know that we have good and we have evil in the world. So we discussed the Wizard of Oz witches in the beginning of the podcast about Glinda the Good Witch, who was the very lovely, pretty one, the light side. And then we had the evil witch depicted as the typical dark and green skin and scary looking, right? So we know there's the good and the evil depictions. So what is a white witch? A good witch could be called a white witch, a blesser, a cunning woman, or a wise woman. In the context of the Wizard of Oz, the good witch is often referred to as Glinda, though she is the good witch of the South in the books or in the musical Wicked. There's also a more detailed breakdown of a white witch. In this term, it's commonly used to describe a witch who practices benevolent magic and witchcraft for good purposes. So that is kind of what I would also fall under, is that I never set out to harm anybody with anything that I do. It's always for protection or to like better things, to attract positive things, never negative stuff. Now, that said, I do throw up words of protection that if somebody trips those, like they're trying to harm me in any way, it doesn't go so well for them. But that's protecting myself. It's not intentionally setting out to harm someone. So if evil or negativity comes towards me, it's deflected back to that person causing evil intent. All right, so cunning folk or wise people is another one that it was called. In Britain and some parts of Europe, these terms were used for those who practiced folk magic and healing, often with a positive connotation. So that would fall under like the white witch or the good witch category. The term white witch is commonly used to describe a witch who practices benevolent magic and witchcraft for good purposes. Uh, Glinda in The Wizard of Oz was known as the Good Witch, so she would have been seen as a helper. And then we have other terms like enchantress, and I love that one, I'll tell you in a second, or sorceress can also be used for good female magic users, though they aren't specific to good witches. So the enchantress term. Now, I am an author of 2 books. If you've been around for a while, you know that. You hear me talk about them from time to time. My second book is a romance book, but it's called The Alabaster Enchantress of New Orleans. Now, alabaster is the color of white, so a white enchantress or a white witch, okay? She's the main character in that book. And while she dabbles a little bit in magic, she really, in the book, is a healer. And she's also a medium, and she's somebody that helps other people in the storyline. And so that was a really important element of that book, was to come up with a name for her. The locals called her the Alabaster Enchantress or the White Witch. So do witches pray? And if they pray, who do they pray to? Witches, particularly those who practice Wicca, generally pray to a god and goddess or deities representing the divine masculine and feminine. These deities can be specific gods and goddesses from various pantheons or can be seen as universal energies. Some witches might also connect with nature spirits, ancestors, or other spiritual entities. I would say that I definitely connect to like ancestor energy a lot, especially when I channel things like that. But in recent times, I have started to connect to some of the goddesses. Lilith being one, Hecate is another one that's been more recent that I've been connecting with. So different energies that I started incorporating into what I do. So in Wiccan traditions, they often involve worshiping a god or a goddess, sometimes referred to as the horned god and the triple goddess. These deities, let me see, can be understood as dualistic expression of the divine, right? The male and the female, both dualities. Individual choice comes down to what a witch can choose to worship. She can choose to worship, or he can choose to worship, any deities that they connect with, regardless of whether they are part of a specific tradition. Some might choose to work with deities from a Greco-Roman, Celtic, Egyptian, or other pantheons, or with deities associated with witchcraft itself, like Hecate. Nature and spirit ancestors. Many witches also connect with nature spirits, ancestors, and other spiritual entities in their practice. So it goes beyond prayer for a lot of practitioners. Some witches, particularly those who see themselves as practitioners of magic rather than religion, may not pray in the traditional sense, but may instead focus on incantations, rituals, or other forms of energetic work. And that's usually more of what I lean towards. Personal connections, ultimately, what deities a witch chooses to connect with is a personal and an individual choice. You're going to decide what you feel called to work with if you work with any deity at all. Typically, there is something that you work with, whether it's God, source, spirit, creator, nature, otherworld deities, you're going to find something that feels comfortable that you want to work with. So let's talk about the different types of witches. We know we've got the good and the evil, right? The good witch and the bad witch. We also have green witches, which are nature focused, working with herbs, plants, and the earthly energy. Now, I want to know in the comments if you feel like maybe you are one of these witches, and if you are, you're in good company. So tell us in the comments, are you a witch? Do you feel like you have witchy instincts? And if you are, what type of magic do you practice? So we have the green witch. The sea witch connects with water bodies, not just the ocean, but their energies. The fire witch, utilizing the power of fire for transformation, renewal, and strength. The eclectic witch integrates practices from various witchcraft traditions, creating a personalized path. The solitary witch, practicing witchcraft independently without a coven. The kitchen witch, focusing on home, nurturing, and creating a sacred space. Let's see, what else do we have? The crystal witch works with the energy and vibration of crystals. The cosmic witch connects with celestial bodies like stars, planets, and the moon. Cottage witch, similar to the kitchen witch, they focus on the home and the family, finding magic in everyday life. Ceremonial witch emphasizes ritual and ceremony in their practices. The theistic witch engages with deities, often following specific pantheons. And the aesthetic, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Aesthetic witch practices witchcraft without believing in higher power. So atheistic, there we go, atheistic, because they don't believe in the higher power or a god. We also have the satanic witch, right? Because as above, so below, light and dark, good and evil. The satanic witch, while not all engaging in dark magic, they may utilize personal gain and manipulation. So a little bit more of the darker magic as opposed to the lighter magic. The secular witch practices magic without religion or worship. The tech witch uses technology in their practice with digital tools and online platforms. And the shamanic witch, utilizing altered states of consciousness to achieve and deliver magic. So there's quite a bit of variation there in the different types of magic or practices used. So do you fit into any of those? And if so, leave me a comment. So back to our original topic at hand. Was Jesus a witch? Do you feel like maybe he was? I do, and I've told people this kind of tongue in cheek over the years. Jesus was a witch, and that's a hill I'll die on. I feel like he was magical in the sense that he had these supernatural abilities, okay, supernatural powers, gifts, talents, abilities given to him by God, okay? All of us have some sort of supernatural gift given to us at birth by God. Some of us don't always come into those gifts immediately, okay? Sometimes they come to us much later in life on our journey. However, we all have some sort of gift. So maybe we lay hands on the sick and we help heal them, right? Is that magic? Is that witchcraft? Is that an act of God? I'll let you decide. But in the grand sense of the question, was Jesus a witch? In the traditional sense, no. There's no documentation that I can find that said that Jesus was actually a witch. Again, it's tongue in cheek. Jesus was not a witch in the traditional sense. While some might interpret his miracles as acts of sorcery, the term witch is generally associated with practices and beliefs outside of the mainstream Christianity, particularly those involving magic, spells, and communication with spirits, which are often condemned in the Bible. I will tell you on a personal level that there are many people that have talked shit on my name, saying that what I'm doing is an act of evil. When I channel for people, they quote scripture saying how you're supposed to stay away from prophets and oracles and priests or priestesses or mediums and psychics, right? Okay, well, if you look at that in the context that it was written, it was for control. Okay, the King James Version of the Bible, especially, that would have been during the Reformation period, where they were trying to cast out all of the pagan belief systems and others. They wanted Christianity to be the one and only religion worldwide. That was their goal. That was part of the Reformation process. And if you dig into history, you're going to find those facts for yourself about how the priests of the Catholic Church, especially, were given something called allowances. Okay, and so the people would come to the masses and the service and the priests and all of these things, and they would come in and ask for forgiveness for their sins, right? So it worked that you could give the church or the priest monetary donations, or you could give them property or gifts of some kind, and they would give you something called an allowance. Oh, well, you've paid this much. Okay, your sins are forgiven. All right. And so we start to see a picture of greed and control and manipulation developing. Now, please feel free to do your own research on that, but it's kind of an eye opener when you start to look back at history of how drastically things have changed from the way that maybe things were once upon a time to modern day. There's definitely a lot of things to be taken into consideration. So, in the mainstream Christianity, there was this need for having Jesus be the Savior. Okay, there's lots we could go into about that topic as well, but we won't in today's podcast. But things have definitely changed, and I feel like a lot of people are spiritually kind of opening their eyes and seeing the truth for what it is, or changing their belief systems. And I can tell you on a personal level, that's something that's happened to me as well. So let's talk about the traditional Christian views for just a minute. So Jesus's actions, like healing the sick and raising the dead, are understood as miracles, right? There's not a lot of people that say, oh no, that never happened, right? There's too many people that back that up, that claim that it is a legit miracle. And if you look, a miracle is defined as something that is unexplainable by modern technology or science, right? It's seen as an act of God. All right, so let's see. He raised the dead, understood as miracles, divine interventions, and acts, and not acts of witchcraft or sorcery. Okay, that's the traditional Christian view of Jesus. In Wicca and witchcraft, Wicca, a modern pagan religion, incorporates witchcraft practices which are distinct from the miracles attributed to Jesus. Okay, so there's a big distinction or difference there. The interpretation of miracles. Some people, including some within Wicca, may view Jesus' miracles as examples of witchcraft. Ding, ding, ding. But this is not a universally accepted view within either Christianity or Wicca. Okay, so a lot of people say, no, that was a miracle what Jesus did. Okay, so explain to me the difference between what Jesus did versus the average person coming up with a spell, an incantation, a ritual, and maybe somebody is also resurrected. Now, I will tell you a story from way back when I was very active in my church days. There was a guest speaker there, and I can't remember his full name, but I want to say his first name was Jody, and it was a man. And he traveled all over the world to really remote places in the world, and some of them were remote villages deep in the forests of Mexico. And he was there with other people. They were doing missionary work, outreach, trying to, lead people to Jesus, right? That was their whole group mission. So the story goes that he had come to this village. They knew that these people were coming. They had permission to be there, and they watched this medicine person, man or woman, I can't remember in the story, but they watched this person do some sort of ceremony or ritual over this deceased person and watched this person literally be resurrected from the dead. And someone in the church said, well, how in the world would you know they were really dead? Are you sure they were really dead? He said, have you ever seen a dead body? Have you ever seen one? Because it's something that you can tell. They are not living, they are not breathing, they are not there anymore. And he said they prayed over this person's body for 3 days. So this person was literally dead for 3 days. And they all gathered around and they all incorporated their energy and they laid hands and they prayed over this body that was deceased. On the third day, they watched this person sit up, draw breath, and speak. And they said there were no lasting effects from whatever caused this person to pass and die after this person was brought back to life. That wasn't Jesus that laid hands on this person, causing them to come back to life. This was average people doing rituals, doing prayers, doing spiritual practices that caused this person to come back from literally death. So I do feel like there's many, many instances of this happening. They're just not very well documented, is the unfortunate part of it. So there's many, many instances that we start to see some of these things if you're willing to do the research and dig a little bit and see what's out there. But there are actual instances where that has happened. The Bible strongly condemns sorcery, divination, and communication with spiritual practices, especially spirits, practice often associated with witchcraft. Now, I will tell you in my own life, because I'm a medium and I actually do this full time, this is my 9 to 5 gig, is I have been persecuted a lot by people, some my own family, extended family, friends, etc., that have said, you really shouldn't be doing that. That's something that it goes against what the Bible teaches. Well, that's great, but there's more religions in the world, there's more practices in the world than just Christianity. So if I don't share your viewpoint on that, I won't hold any grudge against you, and I hope you won't do the same. But I will tell you that communicating with spirit is very, very real, and it's something that happens on a pretty regular basis for me. When I'm trying to, when I'm not trying to, spirit is always active. Spirit is all around us. They want us to communicate with them. We need to realize that we're a speck of dust in the grand scheme of things in our universe. and that the sooner we realize that every living thing that draws breath on this planet is interconnected with the divine energy of Creator, the sooner we can tap into the gifts and the reason we are here. So, therefore, while some may draw parallels between Jesus's miracles and witchcraft, the traditional Christian understandings and the broader definition of witchcraft definitely differ significantly. So the last few bits of information we're going to cover have to do with what kind of magic that Jesus was accused of doing. The miracles of Jesus are the many miraculous deeds attributed to Jesus in Christian texts, with the majority of these miracles being faith healings, exorcisms, resurrections, and control over nature. He did many, many things. I want to say, like, the book of Acts is one of my favorite because it talks about all the different things that he did. What's cool about that book is that there's several witnesses typically to the things that he did. Okay. And so in modern times, I would feel like, like the story that I just told you about the man seeing this other person raised from the dead, there's not a lot of documentation to support these claims, which is the problem. So in Jesus's time, he had this following of people, right? There were these disciples that were with him, the apostles that were with him, people that condemned what he did, right? Like there were people watching him all the time. And so, of course, there's documentation because there were witnesses. So I feel like as we go forward, there's going to start to be things that people witness, all right? And so there will be documentation to support these claims because there will be documentation going forward. So was Jesus ever accused of witchcraft? Well, yes, a lot of times actually. Some early Christians, such as Lactantius in the late 3rd or early 4th century, openly acknowledged that the Jews had accused Jesus of being a magician or a sorcerer. So I'll let you decide. Do you think these were acts of God or Creator? Or do you think that Jesus was a witch or a sorcerer? I personally think that he had a little bit of magic, whether it was good or whether it came from something else. I do think that he had a little bit of magic up his sleeve. I personally think we all have a little bit of magic within us. It's how we use it. Remember, the intention is important. So, are you a witch? Do you know one? Do you want to be one? Are you curious? I invite you to do your own research. So, I hope you learned a little something today. And you tell me, do you think Jesus was a witch? Or was he just magical because he was sent here from God? Have a wonderful week.